Part 33. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mocienu. Chapter 321. Yes, is it that Guyet? The ruthless man who single-handedly killed the boss. When Muchu's true face was revealed, the players around who recognized Muchu were suddenly in an uproar. In an instant, all the onlookers were shocked and looked at the black-robed figure lying on the rattan chair in disbelief. Before, everyone was still worried that the stall owner had offended the Crazy Beast Guild. After all, its president Zhang Duquang was a big boss listed in the God Realm list. But now it seems that the identity of this big boss in front of him is no weaker than Zhang Duquang of the Crazy Beast Guild. The scene instantly became boiling. And Muchu, who was the center of the hotspot, didn't care about the noisy sound in his ears at all. Looking at the beautiful woman in front of him with a smile. The woman was wearing a waisted long skirt, with an elegant temperament and picturesque eyebrows. When their eyes met, Fanyan's eyes were filled with surprise, and her cherry lips opened slightly. "It's you." That day in the deep cave, the scene of Muchu fighting the boss alone made Fanyan remember it vividly. There is no doubt that the man in front of him is also a powerful existence that ranks among the best in the whole server. But now looking at his appearance, when all the strong men are frantically exploring the secret realm and adventuring to find the apocalypse key to open the world passage. This man is here leisurely, setting up a stall. I saw Muchu lazily leaning on the rattan chair, and a cute black kitten rubbed his head in his arms. "It's my honor to meet you, the famous sword lady in the God Realm, here." Muchu stroked the black cat's smooth back and teased with a smile. "Now, are you still going to continue the transaction?" Muchu's tone was calm and the few orcs he killed casually seemed like crushing a few ants. Fanyan stared at the smiling black-robed man, and felt that he was more and more unfathomable. She turned her head to look at the job transfer scroll emitting golden light. She took a breath, stretched out her fair jade arm, and her fingertips flickered. Immediately, accompanied by a dazzling white light, a dazzling white longsword appeared in front of everyone. Quixing sword, quality, S-level. This is a real S-level weapon. The players around recognized the grade of the longsword that Fanyan took out, and they couldn't help but take a breath. This is an extremely rare S-level weapon in the whole server, and only the real big guys can own it. Many people stared at the white longsword with stars in their eyes, salivating. Unexpectedly, Muchu smiled and shook his head. As if sensing something, he looked at the dark green jade pendant hanging around Fanyan's neck. Suddenly, a faint light flashed on the jade pendant, and a faint energy fluctuation also spread out. At the same time, a bloody light suddenly flashed on Muchu's chest. A look of surprise flashed across Muchu's eyes. The ghost box rarely showed such a hungry state. Moreover, he also felt a soul fluctuation different from the composition of this world on the dark green jade pendant. He pointed to the jade pendant hanging around the woman's neck, and the faint light emitted reflected the pattern of a petal. "I want it." When Muchu clearly pointed out the jade pendant hanging around his neck, Fanyan's face changed instantly, his pupils shrank slightly, and he subconsciously grasped the jade pendant in front of his neck. The next second, Fanyan realized that he had overreacted, and hurriedly said seriously, "No, this jade pendant means a lot to me." A hint of panic flashed across Fanyan's smart eyes. Could it be that the man in front of him saw something? Just as Fanyan was panicking, a light curtain suddenly flashed before her eyes. "The whereabouts of the apocalypse key have been found. Everyone who wants to survive, come here." Zhang Wanzan of the Fool Guild. A light curtain appeared in front of all the players. Below the light curtain, a location coordinate was displayed. It was just a short message, but the information presented on it shocked the entire server. "The apocalypse key, found. Has the location of the apocalypse key finally been discovered? It's Zhang Wanzan of the Fool Guild, a big shot on the God Realm list. This is this the legendary server-wide notification tool? Finally, can we finally get out? In an instant, all the players in the server were boiling, their eyes were eager, and they were talking about it. This is their only hope to escape now. The next second after seeing the news, those powerful guilds and players set off without stopping, using various means to speed up, just to get to the coordinates provided by Zhang Wanzhen as soon as possible. Really, someone really found the apocalypse key. How could it be so fast? Is this a trap? The players at the market in the town were talking about different things and had different expressions. But most of them turned around and rushed in one direction. In an instant, the crowded crowd rushed towards the exit of the town, and the sound of collisions and insults was endless. Even if there was only a glimmer of hope, they had to leave this virtual world. Sister Fanyin, the president, and others sent a notice, "Let's go there quickly." Jing Jing, the twin-tailed girl next to Fanyin, received the assembly notice sent by the guild and immediately spoke anxiously. Fanyin was also shocked by this sudden news. Although the shock in her heart had not yet subsided, she knew that now was not the time to hesitate. Finally, she turned around and looked back at Mu Qiu. But she saw that this powerful man who was famous in the god realm was leaning slowly on the rattan chair. He did not look flustered at all, and even smiled meaningfully at Fanyin. "Looking forward to the next transaction with you, Miss Jianji." For some reason, Fanyin's heart became a little flustered inexplicably. The apocalypse key. After Fanyin left, the flow of people on the street gradually became sparse. Even the players passing by were all in a hurry, with anxious expressions on their faces. The players who could gain a foothold in this town were not weak in strength, and they also set off the moment they heard the apocalypse key appeared. There was a slight knocking sound from the tough rattan chair, and the sunlight reflected Mu Qiu's thoughtful face. The next moment, Mu Qiu clapped his hands gently, and a black shadow suddenly appeared in the dark alley behind him. The black shadow continued to grow larger, and finally formed a human figure. A ninja dressed in black walked out of the alley. He knelt on one knee, holding a silk ribbon in both hands. Mu Qiu's mind moved, and the soft ribbon floated up out of thin air and floated in front of Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu raised his hand, and a blood thread slid on the ribbon as his fingertips slid. A row of blood words woven by blood threads was formed. The ribbon flew back to the hands of the Black Shadow Ninja, and then the ninja turned into a ghost and retreated back to the deep dark alley. No matter who it is, I hope it will be more interesting this time. Under the brilliant light, Mu Qiu looked up at the almost real Yang sky, with the corners of his mouth raised. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 322. In a dark and silent world, even the air seemed to be stagnant. This is an absolute forbidden zone between light and day, the ultimate abyss that sunlight can never penetrate, the shadow world. Occasionally, huge snake monsters wander in the dark red sky, but they can't make any sound. One by one, scarlet pupils are waiting for an opportunity to stare in the polar abyss, and even in the dark void, no one knows how dangerous existence is hidden. The fierce hurricane that blew from nowhere blew past with a chilling cold air that made people numb. Gradually, as the cold wind blew past, more pairs of scarlet pupils opened in the dark red earth. Until then, a blood moon appeared faintly on the horizon in the distance, reflecting the whole world in an even more blood-red color. On a low mountain, a white-haired man sat cross-legged. The cold wind swept across the mountain, blowing up a head of messy white hair. The man was sitting on a rock, and the ground beneath him seemed to be dyed red. What was shocking was that the man was shirtless, and his chest and waist were covered with hideous blood stains. Black air continued to rise from the blood stains, as if they would never heal, which was daunting. The originally white trousers he wore on his lower body were also completely dyed black by the black air. What was even more terrifying was that a pair of wide bone wings grew out of the man's back, and the periosteum was also stained with mottled blood stains. A transparent space blade grew out of his elbow, and the man's lower jaw also turned into a gloomy white bone, with only a pair of pupils filled with indifference. Suddenly, a black shadow like ink rushed out from the bloody ground under the white-haired man's feet. The figure of a black-clothed ninja emerged from the ground, bowed and handed a silk ribbon in his hand to the white-haired man. After the white-haired man finished reading the contents on the ribbon, the soft silk ribbon floated in the air. The next second, the invisible space blade twisted and instantly turned the ribbon into a pool of powder. The white-haired man slowly stood up, the bone wings behind him spread out, and waves of space ripples suddenly spread around him. The existence in the dead darkness in front seemed to sense something and let out a threatening roar. Looking up at the blood moon in the sky, the white-haired man's pupils were deep and his expression was indifferent. He couldn't remember how many days and months he had stayed here. With light steps, the white-haired man slowly walked in one direction. The strange thing was that as the man moved his feet, a large number of black shadow monsters continued to emerge from the ground around him. After a while, countless black shadow monsters of different shapes had gathered around the man, but only the outlines could be vaguely seen. These monsters had red eyes and lowered their heads, like dead soldiers waiting for orders. The next second, the man soared into the air, his bone wings soaring, and the surrounding space continued to shatter. A large piece of space debris invaded and all hit the dark abyss ahead. A beast-like roar came from the darkness, and the shadow monsters on the ground were ready to go. In the dark world that no one knew, a new round of war broke out. God's domain continent, 83rd floor, 1000 machine maze. After receiving the news that the apocalypse key had appeared, countless players and guilds immediately set out to the marked location. Whether the news was true or not, they could not miss this ray of hope to escape. However, these impatient players obviously did not realize the danger hidden in the 84th floor. In just a few hours, tens of thousands of players had already poured into the 83rd floor. Most of them were still ordinary players, and they were no match for these high-end monsters. Within half a day, players were killed by the claws of high-level boss monsters. Their bodies exploded into blood-red prisms, and finally turned into data forever summarized in this virtual world. Even if they were lucky enough to pass through many levels and finally reach the target location, most of the players were guild organizations that formed a team. At the final level of the 83rd floor, a large number of guild players had gathered in front of a giant building that was as square as a Rubik's Cube. Dawn Guild President Luo Xiu and Kylan Beast King. Cloud City President Xiao Yuntian. Jian Shipokong President Shipokong. Mad Beast Guild President Zhang Duquang. Wanhua Guild. Guilds and players that ranked at the top of the guild list and the divine domain list appeared under this giant building one after another. Many players looked at each other, with vigilance and solemnity in their eyes. This is a real life and death game, which concerns the life of each of them. With a loud bang, accompanied by a dazzling white light, the square door of the building, which looks like a Rubik's Cube, suddenly opened. At this moment, countless players rushed forward, armed with weapons, and rushed into the building maze. However, just as all the players rushed into the Rubik's Cube maze, somewhere in a dark and secluded place, a long-faced man in armor trembled and took off a badge-like device. This is the rare item that many players dream of, the server-wide notification device. According to the limit of times, users can use this to initiate bullet screen notifications to all players in the server. The long-faced man's forehead was already soaked with sweat, and his pupils were full of fear. He turned his head mechanically, with a flattering smile on his face, and groveled. "Sir, do you think this is enough?" He, Zhang Wanzan, you did a good job." A crazy tone came from behind, and a skinny man stood behind the long-faced man with a wicked smile on his face. A fat man with an extremely fat body chewed a chicken leg in his mouth and smiled. "Brother Kama Itaki, you are so smart. You came up with such a way to trap them all. The Kama Itaki laughed wildly. Fat pig, you are so smart for once. The fat pig was eating with oil dripping from his mouth and smiled. Then how do we find the rebels? Find them. The Kama Itaki laughed like a madman. Why do we have to find them? With so many players, the rebels must be mixed in. If they are all dead, won't our mission be completed? At this time, the long-faced man on the side raised his hand tremblingly. Sir, you see I have finished my work. Oh, I almost forgot about you. The Kama Itaki grinned and looked at Zhang Wanzan. The former guild leader seemed like a rat in front of the Kama Itaki. Suddenly, the Kama Itaki took out a sharp sickle in his hand. As the cold light passed through the air, a hideous bloodline cut through the long-faced man's neck. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 323. As the door of the huge building with square sides like a Rubik's Cube opened, dazzling light shone out. Countless excited players rushed to enter. But when all the players poured into the building, they saw an extremely empty space. The entire space is surrounded by blue barriers on all sides. But under everyone's feet is a white curtain as smooth as a mirror, which can even reflect everyone's clothes and appearance when they step on it. What the hell is this place? Where is Zhang Wanzan? Didn't he find the clue to the key to the apocalypse? Many of the players who can stand here are the strongest players in the entire server, so they rushed here as soon as they saw the news that the apocalypse key was revealed. Naturally, they were suspicious and suspected that this was a trap. But even the Guild of Fools where Zhang Wanzan belongs is far from being able to offend all the guild players in the server. From this, there was a scene where tens of thousands of players rushed to the 83rd floor. But in the end, only a few thousand players came here. Among the noisy players, Miu held a smart black cat in her arms. Looking around at the empty light curtain space, Miu turned to look at Mao Yuming and Luo Ziyuan beside her. You rebels are here in full force this time. Looking around, except for Luo Ziyuan, Mao Yuming, Lone Wolf, etc. beside Miu, the hundreds of players behind him all belong to the Dawn Guild. Mao Yuming scratched his head and explained quietly. This time the situation is urgent, so we have summoned all nearby members. Sister Asing and Brother Jin are taking the remaining members outside to respond to emergencies at any time. The Apocalypse Key's significance to the Resistance is extraordinary. It is not only the key to open the door connecting the virtual and real worlds, but also an important prop for activating the sacred objects held by the Resistance. No matter what, they have to get this key that is related to the fate of the Resistance. Then, Mao Yuming said to his companions. The level on this level is called Thousands of Machines Maze. From the outside, it looks like a huge building like a Rubik's Cube. Once inside, it's like we are surrounded by light curtains on all sides. But everyone should be careful. Just like its name, this building is a maze of terrifying mechanisms that can rotate at any time and change the terrain. Miu was surprised as she watched Mao Yuming describe the dangers and mechanisms of this level in detail. If I remember correctly, no guild or player has ever entered this level. Where do these strategies from Mao Yuming come from? Looking back at the many preparations made by the Resistance Army in the previous boss, it seems that they were all unpredictable. Miu directly expressed her doubts to Luo Ziyuan. The latter was stunned for a moment, looked at Mao Yuming next to him who looked serious as never before, and sighed softly. Actually, the creator of this game is Yu Ming's father. Yu Ming even participated in the production of some backgrounds and tasks in the game. Oh! Miu looked at the tall Kylin beastman with surprise in his eyes. So this guy is the real cheating player? Yu Ming's father was a game designer before the end of the world, and he devoted his whole life to creating this game called God's Domain. After the Zilan base was established, the senior management took Yu Ming's father away, and then there was no news again. Luo Ziyuan looked at Mao Yuming and sighed. In the 2 months since then, Zilan base has launched a spiritual linkage device that can lead to the virtual world. Mu Qiu understood. This could also explain why this kid Mao Yuming was so familiar with this world. I bet this is his back garden. While many players were talking, the ground beneath their feet suddenly shook one after another. Just as the players exclaimed, the light curtain under their feet suddenly divided into several huge platforms, rotating like a Rubik's Cube. Here we come, everyone stay close to the ground. When the world was turned upside down, Mao Yuming reminded his companions around him. As the earth was divided, everyone could only feel the surrounding space rotating as their bodies swayed. After the world began to spin, the ground beneath their feet gradually stabilized, and light returned to everyone's eyes. Here it is. The players of the resistance army looked around and saw that they were in a castle-like building. The thousands of players who had gathered around were now scattered by the maze mechanism. Only a few hundred players were left looking at each other in a daze. Roar! Before everyone could recover, a hoarse roar suddenly came from the depths of the distant castle. I saw a European-style coffin standing deep in the deep castle, and the huge cross on the wall crashed to the ground. Immediately afterwards, a mummy wrapped in blood-stained bandages burst out of the coffin deep in the castle. The whole body of the mummy was stained with mottled and old blood, and the withered body crawling out of the coffin continued to expand. His red eyes stared intently at the vivid divine picture in front of him. In an instant, under the panicked eyes of the players, a war was about to break out. At the same time, other guild players separated by the Rubik's Cube maze are also facing different scene bosses. Beside a deep pool, a giant lizard climbed out, spewing water arrows like a rain of rain from its mouth. Countless players were pierced through the body by the water arrows in an instant, and died miserably. Jing Jing. Seeing that a girl with twin ponytails was about to be pierced through the head by a swift water arrow. Wearing thin armor, Fanyan's face changed, and his figure was like the wind, and his figure flashed in the air and came to the girl. With the waving of the long sword in his hand, a green whirlwind swirled out, dispersing a row of water columns that were surging. There was a cracking sound of a giant object hitting the ground, and Fanyan looked intently, only to see that the giant lizard had already climbed and attacked. In a seemingly dazzling city, a series of well-equipped robots sprayed fierce artillery fire. All players hit by the artillery fire had their bodies instantly pierced with grid-like blood holes, and were crushed into slag by the tall robots while struggling. In the corners and alleys of the city, players of various shapes and sizes fled in all directions. Some powerful players fought with a large number of robots, and it was obviously another fierce battle. In this way, fierce battles took place in the Rubik's Cube maze. Different scenes, different monster bosses. Moreover, these scenes and environments will continue to change with the rotation of the Rubik's Cube. Even these player guilds that gathered the elite players from all servers suffered heavy casualties for a while. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 324. Ha! The Kirin beastman with antlers and a lion-like face shouted and tore a wild leopard in front of him into two halves. On the side, Luo Ziyuan, holding a giant sword, gathered his strength and chopped it hard. Under the powerful force, a mammoth elephant that was 10 times larger than it let out a deafening wail, and in an instant its body shattered into blood-colored prisms and floated in the air. The lone wolf in the distance went deep into the group of beasts, with sharp teeth and well-developed limbs, tearing the beasts into pieces. Mu Qiu stood on the edge of the battlefield, looking around. All he could see were scenes of fierce fighting between the resistance fighters. This was a vast grassland full of lush green, and the ones fighting against the resistance were a group of strong beast monsters. After several rounds of changes, the Rubik's Cube maze evolved into such a huge space today. In the meantime, several large guilds have been eliminated by various strange monsters. Now in this scene, only the Dawn Guild, which is composed of a group of resistance forces, is still fighting. As Mao Yuming, who has transformed into the Kylan Beast King, tears the last tiger apart. The grassland where everyone is located suddenly trembles. This Rubik's Cube maze will undergo 12 changes in each round of scenes, and will be reorganized in the end. Mao Yuming shouted for everyone to stick to the ground. The brightness of the surrounding scenes gradually dimmed, and strange illusions kept flashing in everyone's eyes like lenses. Then, everyone felt the ground under their feet constantly moving and shaking. Like spliced building blocks, with a dull sound of click. It was as if the ground on all sides was spliced together with something and stopped shaking again. Sensing that the ground under them was gradually stable, everyone climbed up carefully. A dazzling light appeared in their eyes again, and there were blue barriers on all sides. And the surrounding scene once again turned into a wide blank space. They actually returned to the Bamu space at the beginning. Looking around again, in addition to the Resistance Army's Dawn Guild, there were also many players from other guilds. And the number of these players seemed to be more than doubled compared to the beginning. It can be seen that the remaining players were all covered with scars and bruises. Some priests with healing abilities took advantage of this gap to treat the wounded soldiers. However, at this moment, a player seemed to have discovered something, looked up and exclaimed, "What is that?" Others followed the voice and looked over, only to see a huge key with a crystal blue light floating at the top of this space. The crystal blue key emitted a weak spatial energy, and the light flashing on it was as dazzling as daylight. Is this the key of Apocalypse? When seeing this crystal blue key floating in the center of the space, the faces of all the players present suddenly became excited. This is a rare treasure that can allow them to leave here and return to the real world. Then, the players present looked at other guilds around them with a cautious look. According to the mysterious man Nightmare, there are only 3 minutes to pass after the Apocalypse key is opened, and it is not clear whether there are other conditions. Therefore, all guilds want to take this key to reality for their own use. Hurry up! Get that key! I don't know who shouted, and all the players present rushed to the crystal blue key suspended in the center with burning eyes. At this critical moment, all guilds became enemies of each other. In an instant, a fierce battle between guilds for the purpose of competing for the key was about to break out in the light curtain space. Someone rushed to the sky, and players from other guilds held weapons to block and resist, and the surrounding players also swarmed in. Orcs and warriors, mages and gunners, artillery and swords clashed together in an instant. Mewtwo was holding a black cat in his arms, looking at the floating key in the sky, his eyes showing a thoughtful look. Just as he was about to move his feet, a sound of breaking through the air suddenly came from in front of him. A huge axe with a domineering aura chopped towards Mewtwo's head. Mewtwo dodged this dangerous blow with a flash, and the huge axe was twisted and retracted in an instant. Mewtwo looked up and found that a tall orc with brown fur and a tiger-like head appeared in front of him. The tiger man carried a huge axe on his shoulder and looked at Mewtwo fiercely. "You are the one who killed our brother." Behind the tiger man, there were also several tall orcs with fierce eyes staring at Mewtwo, with a flash of murderous intent in their eyes. The tiger man in front of Mewtwo was the president of the Mad Beast Guild, a fierce orc known as the Violent Tiger, Zhang Duquang. It is said that Zhang Duquang is extremely protective and vindictive. Some players have speculated that Zhang Duquang will not let it go after Mewtwo killed the people from the Crazy Beast Guild. But no one thought that Zhang Duquang would suddenly attack at this critical moment. This is a madman. You really want to die? Mewtwo narrowed his eyes slightly, and the black cat in his arm seemed to sense something, its hair exploded, and it arched its body and roared at several orcs. Somehow, when he saw this frail black cat, Zhang Tuquang's eyes were shocked, and he actually felt a little afraid. The black cat transformed into strands of black energy entangled in the fluttering black robe. Mu Qiu slowly stretched her hand towards the wooden knife at her waist. Suddenly, Mu Qiu seemed to sense something and turned her head to look up at the sky. I saw a beautiful silhouette passing through the air like a gust of wind among the fiercely fighting crowd, waving the long sword in my hand to bounce away several blocking figures. Fanyan soared into the sky, spreading a pair of thin elf-like wings behind him, and two cyclones rose under his feet. In just a short moment, the Sanskrit sound was already close to the crystal blue key in the sky. In the horrified eyes of all the players, Fanyan Jade stretched out his hand to touch the crystal blue key that shone with the light of hope. Hope flashed across the woman's beautiful eyes, but a dark shadow suddenly appeared in her eyes. A handsome man wearing an open-fronted black robe came across the sky and jumped directly in front of her. The moment Fanyan touched the crystal blue key, Mu Qiu's hand also grabbed the other half of the key. A flash of surprise flashed in Fanyan's eyes, but suddenly the crystal blue key in his hand shone brightly. Immediately afterwards, as the dazzling light instantly illuminated the entire white screen space, a strong spatial fluctuation spurted out from the key, and immediately spread outward like a wave. The irresistible suction force instantly enveloped Mu Qiu and Fanyan. A flash of suspicion first flashed in the former's eyes, but he did not resist this inexplicable suction. The Sanskrit sounds are difficult to withstand this strong spatial fluctuation. The dark green jade pendant hanging around her neck also flashed a pattern at this moment. Following a burst of exclamations from the players below, the dizzying light finally disappeared after a few seconds. Wait, why is that key missing? Many players who came back to their senses were surprised to find the crystal blue key suspended in the air, together with Fanyan and Muqiu. All disappeared. Among the players, Xiao Yuntian from Yungxiao City looked at the direction where the key disappeared and murmured. Sanskrit sound. Not far away, Mao Yuming, Luo Ziyuan and other rebels looked at the sky with worried eyes. Brother Qiu. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MOCNU. Chapter 325. In a quiet and depressing valley jungle, Mu Qiu, wearing a black robe, looked at it intently. All around were huge dark green plants, and deep grass and trees several feet high could be seen everywhere. There were also roars and roars from some monsters in the depths of the jungle. This was the place where they were transported to by the space fluctuations released by the crystal blue key in the Thousand Machines maze. At first glance, it seemed to have come to a hidden level in the game world. But Mu Qiu keenly noticed that this place was slightly different from the game world. Here, whether it was the flow of air or the flow of time and space, it was very different from the world of God's domain, but it lacked some of the real sense of the real world. It felt to Mu Qiu like an independent space somewhere. Mu Qiu frowned slightly. He had felt a similar feeling in another place. The ominous abyss of the 100th floor of the God's domain continent. While thinking secretly, Mu Qiu looked to the other side. Not far from his feet, a beautiful woman was lying unconscious. The woman was wearing a thin armor and a long corseted skirt. Her eyes were closed and her face was beautiful. In the space turbulence just now, Mu Qiu's strength was naturally not affected at all. But the woman named Fanyan was hit by space debris and fell into a coma. The dark green jade pendant hanging around the woman's neck was still emitting bright light. The collar of Mu Qiu's black robe was slightly open, and the purple box of the ghost gradually emerged on her exposed chest. The ghost box was shining brightly, as if a greedy child was staring at the food on the plate and drooling. Mu Qiu's eyes also flashed with a gleam of brilliance. Then, he slowly stretched his arm to the chest of the unconscious beautiful woman. The news of the appearance of the apocalypse key gradually disappeared with the breakthrough of the 83rd floor. Tens of thousands of players poured into the 83rd floor, and only a few thousand survived in the end. A large number of guilds and players died in the dangerous maze changes. This also means that the pattern of the Divine Realm continent will undergo further changes. And Qiu Mu, who was caught in the spatial fluctuations generated by the crystal blue key that day, and Fan Yin, who was known as the Wind Spirit Sword Princess, also disappeared. The clues to the Apocalypse Key were also cut off with the disappearance of Zhang Wanzhen, the president of the Fool's Guild. Some people said that Guya and Fan Yin successfully obtained the Apocalypse Key, and then were brought back to the real world by the open space channel. Others said that the two entered a dungeon level. And the Apocalypse Key that saved them all was hidden in that mysterious level. After all, the two disappeared without a trace under the light released by the crystal blue key in front of thousands of players that day. Since then, there has been no news about the two. In a secluded castle in the Divine Realm continent that is rarely visited by people, a man with long brown hair and a leather coat had a cold face and an extremely cold expression. Below him stood several subordinates with different looks. The man looked sinister and asked, "Give me an explanation. The space key is enough to transmit thousands of units of soul energy. Why did it only transmit 2 people in the end?" The long-haired man's tone was particularly low, and it was obvious that he was extremely angry. The plan to kill thousands of players, including the rebels, was ruined in such an unclear way. At the bottom of the steps, a fat man with a broad waist and a fat head and big ears trembled and said, "Boss, this can't be blamed on us. We clearly opened the space channel that day, but somehow the range of activation was so small that in the end only the man and woman who were closest to us were sucked in." The long-haired man had a cold face, and a gleam of brilliance flashed in his pupils. "Are you saying that there is something wrong with those 2 people?" Then, the long-haired man looked thoughtful. After a while, the man snorted coldly, and a murderous look flashed in his eyes. "In that case, Barbarian Bear, Sickle Weasel, Violent Pig, the 3 of you go to that place to investigate the situation. If there is a problem with those 2 people, report to me immediately. If there is no problem, solve them directly there. Some things must not be known to them, and they must not come out alive." The man's tone was extremely fierce, as if he was hiding some secrets unknown to the world. Hearing the order given by the long-haired man, the fat man shuddered immediately, and his eyes revealed extreme fear. "Boss, can someone else go?" Thinking of the weirdness and horror of that place, the fat man couldn't help panicking in his heart. That place has completely escaped the control of their Zilan base, and one carelessness can really cost lives. That is why they originally planned to trap and kill all the lured players in it. But now, for some reason, the space channel that can accommodate thousands of souls only transported 2 people in the end. "Boss, I want to go to the secret realm to play too." A crisp female voice came, and a girl in light armor jumped up. "Nonsense, that's not a place to play." After receiving a rejection, the girl pouted and looked indignant. The long-haired man's eyes flashed. "You have other tasks. We don't have much time left. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world. Start by devouring the Flame Demon Lord. Author, Mo. Chapter 326. Yefanyan, don't you look at your ugly face? You are a waste as an awakener. How can you be worthy of me? She is the eldest daughter of the Ye family. How can she look like this? Not only that, I heard that she has awakened a rare elemental ability, but she is still at level D after several years. Level D, can't even kill an ordinary zombie. The noisy sarcasm echoed in my ears, and then stopped abruptly in an instant. Then another old voice came. "Fanyan, live. Remember, you are the last hope of my pure-blooded human race." The low and hoarse voice resounded in the woman's mind like a huge bell. Fanyan suddenly opened his eyes and sat up suddenly, his full chest heaving violently. Chaotic memories echoed and swirled in her mind, blurry like fragments, but the occasional flashes of images and sounds went straight to the depths of her soul. Dense cold sweat had already soaked her smooth white forehead, and Fanyan's eyes were still filled with horror and a brief confusion. The memory in her mind finally settled on the scene of the explosion of the crystal blue key suspended in the air. Suddenly, Fanyan seemed to recall something. Her eyes instantly became clear, and she suddenly turned her head to look around, but her sight was finally attracted by the bonfire burning next to her eyes. On a stone not far from her, a man in a black robe was sitting. A bonfire with flames was erected in front of the man, and a black cat was licking its fur at his feet. Fanyan instantly recognized that the black-robed man in front of her was Chiu Mu, the man known as Guye, who was affected by the explosion with her. The embers of the flames continued to rise along with the flames, and the hot air dispelled the cold air. Fanyan subconsciously wanted to stand up, but found that her whole body was extremely weak, and there was a sharp pain under her feet. I saw a hideous wound deep enough to see the bone cut on her ankle. Most of the blood on it had dried up, but the pain from it made it difficult for her to stand. She recalled that this was the injury she suffered in the space explosion. Fanyan endured the pain from all over her body, and a look of doubt flashed in her eyes. Turning to look at Mu Chiu beside the campfire, she asked, "Where is this?" Mu Chiu threw a branch into the fire, looked at Fanyan sitting on the ground, and smiled. "As you can see, I don't know either." Fanyan looked around, surrounded by dark green giant trees in all directions, and even the ground was filled with an indescribable sense of moisture. At first glance, it was like entering a primitive jungle. Looking at the confused Fanyan, Mu Chiu said with a smile, "I don't know where this place is, but have you noticed anything wrong?" After Mu Chiu's reminder, Fanyan, who had woken up, immediately realized that something was wrong. She was a smart person, but the complicated dream made her confused for a while. Fanyan stretched out her jade hand and immediately tried to open the system's game interface. The white hand passed through the air, but the familiar light screen did not appear in front of her. She was surprised to find that she couldn't open the system's game interface. Fanyan's eyes shrank slightly, as if she thought of something, and hurriedly looked down. There were still strands of blood flowing from her ankle. Different from the grid-like wounds that appear after being injured in the virtual game world, these are real blood scars. Looking up at Mu Chiu, even the bars above his head showing his status level disappeared. Fanyan spread her hands in surprise, opened her cherry lips, and said in disbelief, "Have we returned to the real world?" Mu Chiu smiled and shook his head slowly, pointing at Fanyan's body with a hint of meaning. "If we really return to the real world, your clothes will be gone." Fanyan was still wearing the game equipment with thin armor on the outside and long skirt on the inside. If they return to reality, they will naturally not wear virtual clothes in the game. Fanyan, who understood this, had a rosy glow on her face. She subconsciously touched her delicate face again, but the hideous scar was gone. Obviously, they still hadn't returned to the real world. Just then, Mu Chiu, who was sitting on the other side, stood up and slowly approached. Fanyan's eyes quickly flashed with panic, but she didn't show it on her face. A white jade hand touched the long sword at the waist without leaving a trace. This little action naturally could not be hidden from the sharp Mu Chiu. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I won't do anything to you at this time when the situation is unclear." As he said, he grabbed the woman's slender ankle, where there was a hideous wound cut by space debris. A white healing halo appeared in Mu Chiu's palm, and the power of the talisman mixed with the healing power instantly healed the wound. Seeing the scars that were gradually recovering with the naked eye, Fanyan's eyes flashed with surprise. Mu Chiu raised the corner of his mouth. "Don't forget, my profession is a priest." Only then did Fanyan think that the rumored profession of Guye seemed to be called crazy fighting priest. The vigilance in her heart lowered a bit, and a blush flashed across Fanyan's face when the man held her ankle. Knowing that the man was treating himself, he said softly, Thank you. Miu laughed and said, You're welcome, after all, we both got lost in this place. Even as he said this, Miu turned his gaze to the dark green jade pendant around Fanyan's neck. When the woman was in a coma, Miu once offered the demon box with the intention of swallowing the jade pendant directly. But what he didn't expect was that the demon box, as a destructive holy object, not only failed to swallow the jade pendant. Instead, I was almost backlashed by the shining light on the jade pendant. There can only be one reason for this situation. That is, the level of this jade pendant is the same as that of the demon box, even higher than the destruction level demon box. A glint flashed in Miu's eyes, and his intuition told him that this woman must have some kind of secret. He even directly used soul binding to investigate, but this jade pendant actually has the function of protecting the master. Under the impact of a powerful soul wave, Miu's split soul alone was unable to contend. After thinking about it for a while, Miu decided not to alert the enemy, but to observe this woman for a while. Although Fanyan expressed her gratitude to Miu, she was still defensive in her heart. After all, in this strange place, the two of them have only one purpose. Find the apocalypse key and return to the real world. In this way, two men and women with different intentions in their hearts were looking for a way to escape in a quiet place. Is it true or not? Walking in the quiet forest, Miu murmured to herself. Next to him was the woman Fanyan, who looked surprised. He has sensed that the existence of this world is extremely mysterious. Between virtuality and reality, an existence that can accommodate the soul but reject the real. This place is a bit weird. Fanyan also sensed an abnormality. The pattern on the dark green jade pendant hanging around her fair neck appeared and shone brightly. The ground underfoot was dark and loose, but the air was stagnant and dry, and the vegetation and trees all had a sickly green color. The entire dense forest is extremely silent and deep, with no end in sight. Miu wielded the wooden knife to cut off the branches and vines on the side, only to find that the plant stems inside had long been hollow and dry, and there was a black gas coming out of the break. Miu is very familiar with this black energy. This represents the breath of death and decay. These seemingly lush and blooming plants have already quietly died. Miu thought for a moment and walked forward with Fanyan. The entangled vines and green plants seemed to form a passage, deliberately guiding the two of them to walk in a certain direction. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 327. Just like that, Miu and Fanyan slowly walked to a cave deep in the forest. The two looked at each other, and Miu saw the cautious look in Fanyan's eyes. He smiled and nodded, and walked into the cave. Fanyan frowned slightly, but followed Miu in. The cave was deep and dim. Miu held a torch made of branches in his hand, and next to him was the beautiful sword girl Fanyan. The whole cave was extremely deep and quiet, and the white corpses of unknown animals could be vaguely seen on both sides. The dust on it seemed to break at the touch, and it had been silent in this deserted cave for an unknown period of time. The depth of the cave was not great, but when the two walked to the depths of the cave, their eyes flashed with surprise. I saw a human figure hanging on the wall deep in the cave. When the two approached, they found that it was actually a man leaning against the wall, half kneeling on the ground. The man was wearing a set of silver armor, with a blood stain on his neck, and a long face full of fear. A long nail on his forehead nailed him to the wall of the cave. The afterglow of the torch shone on the man's ferocious and frightened face. Seeing the long-faced man who was dead, Fanyan seemed to recognize his identity and exclaimed, "It's Zhang Wanzan." The man who died tragically in the depths of the cave was Zhang Wanzan, the president of the Fools Guild, who released the news of the Key of Apocalypse this time. Zhang Wanzan's strength was also among the best in the entire server. Who was able to kill him in this deep cave? Mu Qiu walked forward slowly, looking at the horrified expression of the long-faced man. His wide-open pupils seemed to still tell the fear he experienced before his death. It seems that we have all been plotted against. The blood on the ground had long dried up, and it can be seen that Zhang Wanzan has been dead for quite some time. Mu Qiu stroked his chin, and his other hand embraced the black cat, his eyes showing a thoughtful look. As the torch in his hand approached, someone wrote a line of bloody words on the wall against which Zhang Wanzan's body was leaning. The bloody words were written in an unknown language, and the winding and twisting words were like ghost paintings, making it difficult to distinguish. But what is puzzling is that next to this line of symbolic words, someone actually annotated it with Chinese characters. Fanyan's pupils shrank slightly, and her cherry lips slightly opened, slowly reading out the blood words on the wall. In the 332nd year of the Wanling calendar, an unknown dark evil spirit invaded the continent, causing the laws to collapse, all living beings to be destroyed, and all living beings were infected and possessed by the evil spirits, turning into zombie monsters that were neither human nor ghosts. After being possessed by the evil spirits, the zombie monsters launched a crazy massacre of the living beings on the continent, and all the living beings invaded by the zombies were assimilated into zombies by the evil spirits. Under the catastrophe, a powerful person intended to save all things from danger, absorbed the power of all spirits, gathered the origin of the world to travel through time and space, but failed at the last moment. The sky collapsed, the earth sank, the continent collapsed, and the success was in vain. The words stopped here, and the blood words on the wall also stopped here. Surprisingly, at the end of this line of blood words, someone drew a heart pattern with blood, which made people confused. It was as if someone had left this message for them on purpose. From what this message means, the place we are in now is a fragment of space after the collapse of the so-called demonic spirit continent. Mu Qiu looked at the bloody words on the wall thoughtfully. But Fanyan thought of something, widened his eyes, and his pupils were horrified. Laws collapsed, all living things were annihilated, turned into zombies. These phenomena are so similar to the real world outside. Fanyan repeatedly looked at the bloody words on the wall, weighing every word. But the more he pondered, the more shocked Fanyan was. Everything that happened in this demonic spirit continent is exactly the same as the end of the world experienced by human society in the real world. Could it be, is this the truth of the end of the world? That mysterious dark evil spirit refers to the zombie virus. Mu Qiu also frowned, shocked by this shocking news. We have discovered an incredible secret. What also surprised Mu Qiu was that it was obvious that their souls were existing in another broken world in a unique way. But this world gave Mu Qiu a familiar feeling, he had felt it somewhere before. The ominous abyss on the 100th floor of the Divine Realm continent. The same deep deathly aura, the same dark and terrifying atmosphere. Obviously, this jungle secret is the same as the ominous abyss. Both belong to the demonic spirit continent that was invaded by the evil spirit and eventually shattered and collapsed. Interestingly, it seems that the fragments of the continent, including the ominous abyss, have somehow merged with the virtual world built with soul energy in the form of soul energy. This is why the Divine Realm continent brings players such a real experience. The Divine Realm continent has already integrated a part of the origin of the world. What kind of power can erode a world to the point of collapse? Is this exactly the same as the apocalyptic disaster in the real world they live in? Mu Qiu fell into deep thought, his eyes deep. Intuition told him that he was very close to the truth of the end of the world. Fan Yin, who was standing by, was still staring at the bloody words on the wall for a long time without coming back to his senses. She subconsciously clenched the dark green jade pendant hanging around her neck. She thought that the secret of her journey was big enough. But unexpectedly, there seemed to be some huge secret hidden behind this world. Mu Qiu seemed to have noticed something and turned his sight to the body of Zhang Wanzan nailed to the wall. With a thought, Zhang Wanzhen's clenched fist suddenly opened, and a piece of parchment with an ancient style floated out from it. There was a torn map engraved on the parchment. The map only depicted a corner, but it showed the cave where Mu Qiu and the others were. Along the cave, through a winding road deep in the forest, there was a pattern of a portal drawn on it. It seems that this is the clue to leave this secret place. But who left so many clues for us? Fan Yin frowned slightly. Her intuition told her that this was not a trap. Mu Qiu gently stroked the soft fur of the black cat, and an inexplicable smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Who knows? Looking at the parchment scroll painted with blood in front of him. Although Fan Yin didn't know whether the person who left the clues was an enemy or a friend. But the news conveyed from it was enough to shock the people of the end of the world. And now if they want to leave here, they can only follow this map and find the door to leave. However, just as the two were discussing how to leave this broken lost place, Zhang Wanzhen, who had already turned into a corpse, stood up with his eyes wide open. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, Mo Xianyu. Chapter 328. Holding the broken parchment map in his hand, Mu Qiu touched his chin and said, "The location marked on the map is still quite far from us. It seems that we have to set off quickly." However, just as Mu Qiu finished speaking, a gust of wind suddenly came from his ears. The thick death aura rushed towards him, and Mu Qiu turned his head slightly, with a cold light flashing in his eyes. "Be careful." Fan Yin beside him noticed something strange and drew out the long sword in his hand to block Mu Qiu. Mu Qiu's eyes flashed with surprise, but he did not move. It was not someone else who attacked them from behind, but the body of Zhang Wanzhen who had just been nailed to the wall. For some reason, Zhang Wanzhen suddenly became a corpse after smelling the breath of humans. The skin and flesh on his body rotted and fell off, and his face revealed a hideous and terrifying white skeleton. The nail was still firmly nailed to the center of its forehead, and blood was still flowing from it. It pounced towards Mu Qiu with its sinister claws and ferocious face. Fan Yin reacted and turned around instantly to draw the long sword from her waist to resist. But what she didn't expect was that the long sword in her hand, which was indestructible in the game world, was shattered into powder the moment it touched the sharp claws of the zombies. How is it possible? Fan Yin's expression was trembling. The long sword in her hand was an S-level weapon in the game. Mu Qiu on the side shook his head slightly. They were neither in the virtual game world nor the real world. This space fragment similar to the secret realm was located in the gap between virtuality and reality. Props and equipment in the game became a fragile soul energy here, vulnerable to a single blow. The long sword in her hand was instantly smashed into a pool of powder and disappeared in the air. Seeing that the zombie's claws were about to grab her delicate face. In an instant, the dark green jade pendant hanging around Fan Yin's neck suddenly shone brightly. Under the dazzling white light, the zombie's claws that touched the air seemed to have encountered some natural enemy, and they shrank back as if they were escaping. At this moment, a strange color flashed in Mu Qiu's eyes. Then, a group of phantoms suddenly rushed out of the jade pendant with shining light. Accompanied by a loud cry, a phantom of a ghostly white spirit bird emerged. In an instant, the whole dark cave was illuminated by bright light. When the white spirit bird appeared, the zombie transformed from Zhang Wanzhen's corpse actually showed a trace of human fear in his eyes. In the midst of the light, the spirit bird spread its wings, with an unrivaled holy aura that overlooked all living things. Immediately, a sharp roar came out of the zombie's mouth, and its sturdy body and the silver armor it was wearing exploded into a ball of blood mist. Blood like a fountain splashed in the cave. Mu Qiu held Fan Yin by his side and raised a light curtain in his hand. And the spurting dirty blood was also bounced off by the light curtain. The crisis was resolved, and the shadow of the white bird hovering over the cave gradually dispersed into star-like light particles. All returned to the dark green jade pendant on Fan Yin's neck. A petal pattern flashed on the surface of the jade pendant, and then dimmed again. A look of horror flashed in Miuchiu's eyes. At the moment when the white spirit bird emerged, the Zilong blood in his body actually began to surge faintly. Before Fanyan could react, Miuchiu embraced her in his arms, and a rare blush appeared on her beautiful face. Before she could break free, Miuchiu had already loosened his arms and said with a smile, "Why were you so eager to save me just now?" Fanyan was stunned and exhaled. "Don't get me wrong, I just don't want to owe you a favor. You saved me once in the jungle, so we are even now. This little girl is quite interesting." Miuchiu smiled slightly and pointed to the fullness on the woman's chest. "Compared to this, I am more curious about what kind of treasure this is that can kill the zombie in an instant." When Fanyan heard Miuchiu's question, a hint of panic flashed in her eyes. But she still explained calmly that this was the reward she got after completing a hidden task in the game world. Miuchiu glanced at her with a meaningful look, narrowed his eyes and smiled and nodded. In this way, two men and women with different thoughts embarked on a journey for the same goal. When Miuchiu and Fanyan walked out of the cave, their expressions were quite complicated. The root of everything came from the information given in the cave. Not only did they know where they were, but they also knew another shocking secret about the truth of the end of the world. It's a pity that the cave has not revealed more specific information. Everything will probably have to wait until they reach the location on the map to know more. Feeling the breath of death drifting in the air, recalling Zhang Wanzhen's rapid corpse transformation in the cave, Miuchiu said, "This secret realm is full of ominous dead spirits. Ordinary humans will be infected into zombie monsters if they stay here for a while. I just don't know if there are other creatures here." However, just as Miuchiu finished speaking, a rustling sound suddenly came from the depths of the jungle in the distance. Then, wild and fierce roars like wild beasts began to converge towards the two of them. It seems that there is no need to answer. Suddenly, a series of black shadows rushed out from the distant jungle. These figures turned out to be ferocious beasts whose flesh and blood were rotten, and even their white skeletons could be vaguely seen. Some of these beasts had bodies like lions and tigers, but their joints were protruding, their shapes were abnormal, and they carried a heavy aura of death. A few pieces of rotten flesh hung on the skeleton, and only a pair of white pupils were filled with bloodthirstiness. From the appearance alone, these giant beasts were no different from the infected heretic monsters in the real world. More and more rotten corpse beasts gathered towards Miuchiu and the others like sharks smelling blood. In an instant, the breath of death enveloped the two of them. They were all attracted by the blood of the zombie in the cave. Fanyan held his breath and concentrated, subconsciously tightened the jade pendant in his hand, and smiled bitterly. "It seems that we have to fight to the death this time." Miuchiu shook his head, stroked the black cat in his arms, slowly walked forward and joked, "Since you just saved me, now I should show my skills." After that, the black cat in Miuchiu's arms jumped down directly, and a low long howl came out of his mouth. Roar! Accompanied by a deafening beast roar. The black cat's body began to grow bigger and bigger, and the hair on its body instantly burst into groups of hot black flames. At this moment, Miuchiu also stretched out his hand and slowly climbed up the wooden sword at his waist. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord. Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 329. Chiu Mu. Looking at Chiu Mu, who was walking forward alone, a trace of worry flashed in Fanyan's eyes. Her weapons were all damaged in the battle with the zombies. Fighting these corpse beasts infected by evil spirits with bare hands is tantamount to a dead end. Subconsciously, she clenched the jade pendant on her chest and stared at the black figure in front of her. Miuchiu walked forward slowly, and the corpse beasts around her showed their fangs and were ready to go. The next second, the black cat in Mu Chiu's arms suddenly jumped out, and a deafening long howl came out of its mouth. As the figure landed, the black cat's hair suddenly burned with intense black flames. Its short body also grew at a speed visible to the naked eye. In an instant, this seemingly obedient kitten turned into a huge tiger with black flames all over its body. Roar! The tiger roared to the sky, and an invisible pressure began to spread to the mountains and forests in all directions. At this moment, Mu Chiu raised the corner of his mouth and slowly pulled out the wooden sword worn on his waist. With a swish sound. As Mu Chiu pulled, the wooden sword gradually burned with red flames. A flash of surprise flashed across Fanyan's lively eyes. She clearly saw that dark red patterns began to condense on the black robe on Mu Chiu's body. However, at this moment, the corpse beasts gathered around suddenly attacked Mu Chiu. They haven't smelled the smell of flesh and blood for a long time. The fear of the tigers might has long been covered by bloodthirsty greed. These monsters without intelligence rushed towards Mu Chiu and the others like they were risking their lives. Mu Chiu held a wooden sword wrapped in red flames, and his eyes flashed with a sharp look in an instant. The next second, as Mu Chiu swung the wooden sword in his hand violently, a ray of fire suddenly flashed in the air. A half-moon arc of fire cut through the sky. Then, clusters of flames like nodes began to explode in the air. Each node explosion represented the huge body of a corpse beast annihilated in the hot flames. What was surprising was that not only were the bodies of these corpse beasts rotten and bones were clearly visible. Even the blood splashed after the bodies exploded showed a strange dark black color. When the blood of these corpse beasts was splashed on the ground after the flames exploded, the deep grass and trees withered and corroded in an instant. Huh! Accompanied by a whistling gust of wind, the giant tiger with black flames all over its body rushed out in the blink of an eye. Wherever the giant tiger passed, black flames gushed out, and those corpse beasts turned into a pool of ashes in an instant, leaving no bones. Roar! The black flame giant tiger turned into a gust of wind and swept the whole scene, and countless corpse beasts were burned by its flames. A long roar shook the sky and resounded in this deep jungle. There was a faint rustling sound from the depths of the jungle in the distance. But when they felt the overwhelming momentum of the giant tiger, these unknown beings all chose to surrender and retreat. In an instant, hundreds of corpse beasts attracted by the bloody smell were all destroyed. The residual heat of the flames still lingered in the whole place, adding a bit of warmth to the cold atmosphere around. The red flame on the wooden sword in Mu Chiu's hand dissipated, and the black robe behind him fluttered. His strong figure could still be vaguely seen on his open chest. In the distance, the powerful black flame giant tiger came running wildly, and the earth shook. As the body kept approaching, the black flames burning on the black flame giant tiger gradually faded. Its huge body also shrank back to the tender black cat. Meow! With a pounce, the black cat pounced back into Mu Chiu's arms. Putting back the wooden sword, Mu Chiu gently stroked the black cat's round head and turned to look at the beauty behind him. Fanyan looked surprised, staring at Mukiu and the black cat in his arms. What is this? It was the first time that Mukiu saw Fanyan's surprised eyes, which was quite interesting. He stroked the black cat, looked at the jade pendant on Fanyan's waist and smiled. This is also the reward I got after completing the hidden task. Fanyan's face flashed a blush, knowing that Mukiu was teasing her. Mukiu smiled, then looked down at the black blood bursting out of the corpses on the ground. This black blood obviously carried a deep death aura, and after corroding the flowers and plants on the ground, black air rose from it. The virus in these corpses has obviously penetrated into the bone marrow, and even the blood is highly infectious. The level of the corpses besieging them is generally not low, and in the real world, it is far from being comparable to ordinary low-level heretics. Fanyan frowned slightly. Could it be that in our world, those monsters and heretics will eventually become like this after evolution? Mu Chiu did not answer, but walked forward slowly. They were located in the middle of the valley, and a distance ahead was a commanding height like a cliff. Standing on the top of the mountain, you can naturally overlook the entire valley. Miu stood still, leaving a broad back. Fanyan followed behind him from a distance, and when he saw the scene in front of him, a tremor flashed in his eyes. The sky was deep and chaotic, and only the light curtain at the end of the sight reflected the light of stars. As far as the sight can reach, it is all dark green jungle and mountains, without any signs of human traces. The whole valley seemed to be monopolized by the light screen interfaces on all sides, and they were the trapped beasts in the valley. The secret realm we are in is a corner of the broken world that was eroded by the so-called evil spirit. Miu opened and closed his mouth, and said calmly, "Even this corner of the world fragment is full of gloomy death, and is about to enter complete destruction." Turning around and looking at Fanyan with a surprised look on his face, "As for the next step, let's get to the location on the map as soon as possible. Sign in at the end of the world, start by devouring the flame demon lord." Author, MaleProtagonist. Chapter 330. They are coming. Run, those monsters are coming. Help, save me. The shrill screams and wails echoed in my ears. The sky was gloomy, and as the shadows covered it, countless ragged humans were terrified and fled in a panic. In just a short moment, the defense line formed by the remaining humans had collapsed. For a time, countless humans were killed and wounded, and corpses were everywhere. The blood-stained human corpses and the terrifying and hideous laughter of monsters echoed in the darkness. This day is the end of the human race. Child, the human race in this world has no future. Live on, you must live on. Go back to the past with the hope of the whole race, go back to 1,000 years ago. Eliminate the ancestor of the eternal night before the catastrophe and prevent the rise of the eternal night dynasty. You are the last hope of our human race. You are the son of the Savior. The old voice echoed in his mind, low and hoarse, but it seemed to fall into his heart like a huge stone. Fanyan suddenly woke up from the dream and sat up suddenly. Chaotic fragments of memory filled his mind, replaying like an old film. The originally clear eyes were full of bloodshot, the beautiful face turned pale, and beads of sweat appeared on his smooth and white forehead. Fanyan's chest rose and fell violently, and his expression was terrified. Obviously, he had not recovered from the nightmare just now. Subconsciously, he tightly grasped the glittering jade pendant around his neck, as if it was the only object she could rely on. "You seem to have nightmares often." Just then, a clear voice came from beside him. Fanyan, who was awakened, suddenly turned her head and saw Miu sitting on the grass on the hillside. He held his chin with his right hand and looked at him with interest. Fanyan then recalled that she and the man in front of her had been walking in the dense forest for an unknown period of time. Finally, they chose to rest on this hillside. The bushes on both sides gradually became sparse, and a dark river could be vaguely seen from a distance. A bonfire was lit next to the two of them, reflecting the handsome face of the man. Looking closely, the man held his chin with one hand and tilted his head slightly, looking at himself with a smile on his lips, looking harmless. This look was very different from the domineering figure of the boss fighting alone in Fanyan's eyes. Having a nightmare? Fanyan shook her head slowly, but the shock hidden in her eyes had not faded away. Miu narrowed his eyes and looked at the jade pendant on the woman's chest without leaving a trace. A gleam of brilliance flashed in his eyes, and he said softly, "Do you mind telling me your story?" Looking at Miu's sincere expression, ripples flashed in Fanyan's clear eyes. "Do you believe in fate?" Holding her legs together, Fanyan lowered her head, her eyes flickering. Until this moment, this always strong girl showed her vulnerable side to strangers for the first time. "I live in a corrupt and dark world, where it is ruled by a powerful force, enslaving and oppressing the humans living there. The humans there have no rights to speak of, from land, food, to freedom, layer by layer of exploitation. All those who resist that force will be ruthlessly slaughtered like livestock. Miu looked at the woman who was trapped in the depths of his memory, his expression indifferent. My mission is to save my people and save them from the darkness. Fanyan suddenly raised her head and looked at the endless chaos and darkness in the sky. When she first came to this world, she was entangled with two fragments of memory in her mind. Even many times, she herself could not tell which time and space she was the real her. But the nightmare that kept echoing in her mind recently reminded her of her mission to come to this time and space. That is, before the Eternal Night Dynasty rose and became the overlord of this world. Destroy the Lord of Eternal Night and destroy the Eternal Night Dynasty. Fanyan suddenly looked at Miu and smiled bitterly. It's ridiculous, trying to fight a powerful force with one's own strength. The intersection of the two was limited to the game world, and in reality they were just strangers who had never met. For Fanyan, perhaps after leaving the God Realm world, the two would not recognize each other even if they met in such a big world. In this world where there are only the two of them, Miu is a perfect listener. This is also the reason why she confided her heart to Miu. Looking at the woman with sparkling eyes, Miu chuckled and shook his head. Stretching and yawning, Miu also looked at the dark sky. I think the funny thing is not your weakness, but the faith you keep. Faith. The woman raised her head, and Miu lowered his head to look at her. When their eyes met, Fanyan saw a little teasing in Miu's deep eyes like the ocean. That's right, since you are in so much pain, why do you let yourself bear so much? Miu's eyes revealed a rare seriousness, and he laughed loudly. I am free before my death, so why should I care about the flood after my death? Looking at the carefree Miu, Fanyan raised the corner of his mouth, shook his head and laughed. I can't escape, this is my fate. She is a dead soul from 1,000 years later. The entire human race has used all their luck to send her here. She carries the hope of hundreds of millions of human beings. Miu looked at the jade pendant on Fanyan's chest and said jokingly. I am a little curious about what kind of opponent you are facing. If you have the chance, you must see it. He can feel the powerful energy contained in the jade pendant, which shows that the opponent Fanyan is facing must not be ordinary. Fanyan looked at Miu and said. What about you? You can achieve such a status in the game world. Your identity in reality is also extraordinary, right? In Fanyan's heart, Miu has been linked to the young master of a large force in the end times. Miu narrowed his eyes and joked. Actually, I'm just an ordinary survivor. I got a great job in the game by chance. Fanyan seemed to have walked out of the nightmare. Hearing Miu's answer, he laughed out loud, with a look of doubt in his eyes. If the great Guya who is so powerful in the god's domain is spread outside and is just an ordinary person, you will probably be in trouble by many people. How many human forces has Miu offended in the game world? Miu stroked his chin and said seriously. Do you really want to know my identity? Fanyan smiled and shook her head. You and I don't know each other. If nothing unexpected happens, we will have no intersection after leaving this world. Why should I care about your identity? Miu didn't expect Fanyan to have such an answer. Slightly startled, he suddenly laughed out loud. Miss Jianji, you are really interesting. It has been a long time since he met such an interesting person. Miu took out two unknown fruits as big as fists like a magic trick. He picked them from the trees in the jungle. They are neither poisonous nor tasteless. Throwing a fruit to Fanyan, Miu smiled and said. Since you have made up your mind, let's drink to your faith. Fanyan took the fruit and looked at Miu's face with a smile like spring breeze. She blinked her beautiful eyes and laughed with her. A beautiful woman's smile is charming. Just like this, under the chaotic night, a man and a woman on the hillside beside the dark river held fruits in their hands and smiled at each other. A hearty laugh suddenly came from the silent night sky, adding some vitality to this long dead world. The light curtain covering this world flickered with stars in the dark night sky. It was as if a clue was leading the fateful meeting.